And welcome back once again. And this is now part 4 of our discussion into the Shadow. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Shadow's enemies. Really, he only has one. And that's the character of Shiwan Khan. Now, Shiwan Khan was a direct descendant, the last living descendant of Genghis Khan. And he was a martial arts master. He was a master of espionage, of basically, he was, a would-be world conqueror. And that's exactly what Shiwan Khan wanted to do. He wanted the world. And the Shadow, time and time again, would thwart him. He was, the Joker, the Moriarty, the Lex Luthor to Allard and the Shadow. Now, the incarnation that Chaykin had brought about to DC was continued by writer Andy Helfer and, for a while, artist Bill Sienkiewicz in a recurring Shadow series. Now, again, you have to understand that this was in the era of The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen that this stuff was coming out. So a lot of comics from that time were were almost satirizing the era in which they were in. There's a lot of, there's talk about nukes, there is discussions, obviously nukes, which I think I already mentioned, drugs, TV, politics, all of these get thrown into this world of the Shadow, because it is intended to be somewhat satirical. And this particular arc is focused on Shiwan Khan. And now that he's older. So, so this incarnation of the Shadow comic lasted not for very long. It lasted until about 1988. Right around the time that the Marvel graphic novel of the Shadow had to come on the scene. So back in 1990, the Shadow came about again, and that was in a whole new comic called The Shadow Strikes. Now, The Shadow Strikes was a return to the, basically, I think DC felt that with the new Shadow, that it was getting too out there, it was getting a little bit too political, and it was maybe a little bit too over people's heads. I think that was part of the reason that they ended up canceling it, other than the fact that, obviously declining sales really hurt it. But The Shadow Strikes returns Lamont Cranston / Kent Allard to the 1930s, and it returns, all of his agents, from, the young, beautiful Margot Lane, the young Harry Vincent, the young Burbank, the young Shrevey, and essentially gives them, a chance to, mete out justice in the 30s once again. Now, in this comic continued for a couple years, but unfortunately, again, cut short. In 1994, the Shadow made a bit of a resurgence with a major motion picture from Universal Studios. It was directed by Russell Mulcahy, who had directed two of the Highlander films, the original, and Highlander 2: The Quickening, which is a horrible, awful film, but the first one's a classic. Everybody knows that. He'd also directed quite a few early Duran Duran videos. This was a guy who definitely favored style over substance, but, his substance was actually pretty good. More recently, he's done films like The Mummy, The Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, Resident Evil, Extinction, I don't know if he did the 3D one. I honestly don't know. I don't really care. But so he's done some good movies, some bad movies. The Shadow film with Alec Baldwin, Penelope Ann Miller playing Margot Lane, and John Lone playing Shiwan Khan. That was not a huge success, but not a huge failure either. The film itself is charming, and it explores kind of both elements of both the books and the radio show, in which he does, he is fully cloaked, he does have the twin 45s, and he's not above blowing some people away, but he does also have psychic abilities, and he is able to render himself invisible. Which makes for some kind of lame CGI, but it was 1994. I'm sure if it was done in this area, it'd look great. Now that's also spawned a brief return of Mike Kaluta to the Shadow, and Dark Horse Comics now own the rights, and they published a mystery story of the Shadow, also set in the 30s, that ran for 4 issues, in the Coils of the Leviathan. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those issues lying around because I don't know where they are. And I don't think they were ever collected in a trade, so that sucks too. But, you do what you can. And so to me, the reason why the Shadow is so cool is that it dips into a part of my youth. Now, obviously, I grew up on the major superheroes, but when I was in my prepubescence, if you will, there was a radio station in Chicago that played, for a while, it played all music. All they did was play stuff from the 30s, 40s, and 50s music, and almost every night, and for several hours on the weekends, they would play old radio shows. And I fell in love with those radio shows, with a lot of them. I was a big fan. I wasn't a huge fan of some of the comedy or the drama, but the mystery, the action-adventure series, these were all terrific to me. And my favorite was The Shadow. It just, when you listen to things on the radio, if you ever really take the chance and listen to some old radio shows, there's really some wonderful stuff in there. It really does take you to a place that is, that feels and sounds, obviously, it allows you, obviously, to create the whole picture in your mind rather than just seeing it, played out for you either on the comic page or on the screen. Now, there were also some, lest I forget, there were some Shadow serials that were done in the 40s, but they pretty much sucked, so I won't even really talk about them. Again, these were, the Shadow was an exciting character to me because of his mystery. And then once I started reading the comics, he was fascinating to me because of his sense of purpose, because he was a leader of people. He was not just, this lone hero, and the people that worked with him, that worked alongside of him, or I should say worked for him, also had purpose as well. And many of the stories are about them, are about the side characters, and very few stories were about the Shadow himself. So it was part of that mystery, that elusiveness, that kept me entertained for many years. And then reading, and then finally getting to Chaykin's Shadow and The Shadow Strikes, that really also reinforced just, how awesome of a character it was. So do yourself a favor. If nothing else, grab Blood and Judgment. But I would also definitely recommend picking up the Private Files of the Shadow, which is the hardback collection of the original Kaluta and O'Neill stories. And don't forget to listen to some of the shows. So that's it for the Shadow Gallery. And we'll see you next time.